In 1982, renowned psychiatrist Dr. Judith Orloff encountered a patient who would fundamentally alter her understanding of human connection and vulnerability. The patient, a trauma nurse named Sarah, had built an extraordinary career helping people in their darkest moments. She was beloved by patients, respected by colleagues, and known for an almost supernatural ability to sense what others needed before they asked. Yet she sat in Orloff's office emotionally shattered, having just escaped her third abusive relationship in a decade. "I don't understand," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can read people. I know when someone's in pain. I sense lies before they're spoken. So why do I keep choosing partners who destroy me? It's like I have X-ray vision for everyone except the people who hurt me most." Dr. Orloff had heard similar statements from dozens of patients, highly sensitive, deeply compassionate individuals who seemed to possess an internal radar for others' emotions. But what struck her about Sarah's case was the paradox at its core. The very gifts that made her exceptional at healing others appeared to make her vulnerable to those who would exploit that gift. Sarah could sense a patient's hidden pain from across a room, yet she'd missed the warning signs in 3 partners who systematically dismantled her sense of self. Over the next 18 months, Dr. Orloff worked with Sarah to map what she would later term empathic vulnerability patterns, psychological mechanisms that cause highly empathetic individuals to attract, bond with, and struggle to leave toxic personalities. What emerged from this work would contribute to a fundamental shift in how we understand empathy, not just as a gift or strength, but as what researchers now call a risky strength, a profound capacity that, without proper boundaries and self-awareness, can become a liability. Sarah's breakthrough came when she recognized something that would challenge everything she believed about herself. Her empathy wasn't making her more perceptive about toxic people. It was making her blind to them. The very mechanism that allowed her to feel others' pain so deeply was the same mechanism that toxic individuals exploited to bypass her defenses. If you've ever found yourself inexplicably drawn to people who drain you, repeatedly choosing relationships where you give everything and receive manipulation in return, or sensing that your compassion somehow attracts those who would abuse it, then Sarah's story holds the key to understanding a phenomenon that millions experience but few can explain. Perhaps you've noticed a pattern. The more caring you are, the more narcissists, energy vampires, and emotional manipulators seem to find you. Maybe you've wondered why your ability to understand others doesn't protect you from those who misunderstand or, worse, exploit you. Or perhaps you've experienced the confusing sensation of knowing someone is harmful while simultaneously feeling compelled to help them, to save them, to be the one person who finally breaks through their walls. What Dr. Orloff discovered in her work with Sarah and hundreds of similar cases was that empaths don't just happen to encounter toxic people more often, they're specifically targeted by them. This isn't coincidence or bad luck. It's the result of identifiable psychological mechanisms that operate like a beacon, broadcasting your empathic nature to those who've learned to recognize and exploit it. The people who break free from this pattern don't just learn to set boundaries or love themselves more. They understand the specific vulnerabilities that their empathic nature creates, and they develop what researchers call protected empathy. The ability to maintain compassion while simultaneously defending against those who would weaponize that compassion against you. This isn't about becoming less empathetic. It's about recognizing that your greatest strength requires the most sophisticated protection. Today, you'll learn the 7 hidden mechanisms that make empaths magnetic to toxic personalities, and more importantly, how to transform vulnerability into conscious power. Principle 1. The resonance trap. The first mechanism operates like a psychological homing signal that empaths broadcast without knowing it, what Dr. Orloff termed emotional resonance. Those with heightened empathy don't just observe others' emotions, their nervous systems literally mirror and reproduce those emotional states internally. Neuroscience research using functional MRI imaging reveals that when empaths witness someone in distress, their mirror neuron systems activate more intensely than average, creating an actual felt experience of the other person's emotional state. But here's what most people don't realize. Toxic personalities have developed a sophisticated ability to recognize this resonance. They've learned, often unconsciously, to identify the subtle signs that someone will not just sympathize with their pain, but actually feel it. This recognition happens in the first moments of interaction through micro-expressions, response patterns, and something researchers call empathic leakage, the subtle ways your face, body language, and attention betray your capacity to absorb others' emotions. Consider the case of Michael, a social worker who specialized in addiction recovery. He had an uncanny ability to connect with clients others had written off as hopeless cases. But in his personal life, he found himself repeatedly involved with partners who were emotionally unavailable, manipulative, or outright abusive. His therapist helped him recognize a pattern. In every relationship, there had been an early moment, usually in the first conversation, where his partner had shared a story of profound pain or trauma. "I felt it," Michael explained. "Not just sympathy, I felt their pain in my body. And something in me said, I can help this person. I understand them in a way others don't." That feeling was intoxicating. It made me feel special, chosen, necessary. What Michael discovered was that his resonance response wasn't just emotional, it was creating a neurochemical cascade. When he felt someone's pain deeply, his brain released oxytocin and dopamine, creating a subtle high that reinforced the connection. Toxic individuals, particularly those with narcissistic traits, had learned to identify and trigger this response deliberately, often by sharing strategic vulnerabilities designed to hook empaths' rescue instincts. The critical insight: toxic people don't just find empaths attractive because empaths are kind. They find them attractive because empaths provide a specific type of emotional supply that others can't: the experience of being deeply felt, understood, and prioritized without having to reciprocate. Your resonance feels like validation, attention, and unconditional acceptance to someone who craves those things but cannot or will not provide them in return. Develop what researchers call resonance awareness, the ability to notice when you're feeling someone else's emotions versus your own. When you feel a sudden emotional shift in someone's presence, pause and ask yourself, did I feel this way before this interaction, or am I absorbing this from them? This simple question creates a crucial separation between empathy and emotional fusion. Strong resonance in early interactions isn't automatically a red flag, but it should be a yellow one. If you find yourself feeling deeply connected to someone you barely know, or experiencing their pain as your own within the first conversations, slow down. Healthy relationships build intimacy gradually. Intense, instant connection is often a sign that your empathic resonance is being triggered, not that you found a soulmate. But resonance is just the first mechanism. The second is even more subtle and dangerous. Principle 2. The healing compulsion. The second mechanism that makes empaths magnetic to toxic people operates at an even deeper level, what Dr. Ross Rosenberg calls the healer's paradox. Empaths don't just feel others' pain, they experience an almost physiological need to relieve that pain. This isn't just kindness or compassion, it's a compulsive drive that activates the same neural pathways as addiction. Brain imaging studies conducted at the University of California reveal something remarkable. When empaths witness suffering they cannot alleviate, their anterior cingulate cortex, the region associated with processing pain, shows activity levels comparable to experiencing physical pain themselves. In other words, witnessing pain you cannot heal literally hurts. This creates what researchers call a negative reinforcement loop. Helping others relieves your own distress. Dr. Ramani Durvasula, a clinical psychologist specializing in narcissistic abuse, explains the mechanism toxic personalities exploit. Empaths often come from backgrounds where they learned that their value depended on their utility to others. They developed an identity around being the healer, the helper, the one who could fix what others couldn't. Narcissists and other toxic personalities have a radar for this. They present themselves as wounded souls who just need the right person, the empath, to finally understand and heal them. Consider the case of Elena, a therapist who had built a successful practice helping trauma survivors. She described her pattern with chilling clarity. "I was drawn to broken people, not just in my work, that made sense, but in my romantic life. I would meet someone and within the first few dates, they'd share some deep wound, some way they'd been misunderstood or hurt. And I would think everyone else gave up on them, but I see who they really are. I can help them become that person." What Elena didn't recognize was that she was confusing her professional role with her personal relationships. The toxic partners she attracted had learned to present themselves as projects, people with potential who just needed the right person to believe in them. This presentation triggered Elena's healing compulsion, creating an addictive dynamic where her sense of self-worth became tied to her ability to fix her partner. The devastating reality: toxic personalities often don't want to heal. What they want is someone who will continuously try to heal them, because that continuous effort provides attention, validation, and control without requiring them to change. Your healing efforts become their narcissistic supply. The more you try to help, the more broken they reveal themselves to be, keeping you in a perpetual state of hope and effort while never actually improving. Implement the professional boundary transfer. Apply the same boundaries you'd maintain in a professional helping role to your personal relationships. No therapist would accept a client who refused to do any work between sessions but demanded the therapist work harder. No doctor would continue treating a patient who deliberately sabotaged their treatment plan. Yet, empaths routinely accept this dynamic in personal relationships. Ask yourself, if this person were my client, would I consider this a healthy therapeutic relationship? Am I seeing evidence of genuine growth, or am I seeing performance of growth designed to keep me engaged? If someone's wounds are always fresh, always require your attention, but never actually heal despite your efforts, you're not in a relationship. You're providing narcissistic supply. The third mechanism reveals why empaths often can't see these patterns until it's too late. Principle 3. The projection mirror effect. The third mechanism is perhaps the most psychologically sophisticated. Empaths project their own emotional depth, authenticity, and capacity for growth onto others, assuming that everyone processes emotions with the same complexity they do. Dr. Judith Orloff calls this emotional projection, the unconscious assumption that because you feel deeply, others do too. This creates a devastating blind spot that toxic personalities exploit masterfully. Here's the mechanism. When you encounter someone, your brain automatically uses itself as the template for understanding them. Because you experience guilt when you hurt someone, you assume others do too. Because you're capable of self-reflection and change, you believe others are equally capable. Because your expressions of vulnerability are genuine, you interpret others' vulnerability as equally authentic. This is called mind blindness to mind blindness, the inability to recognize that some people fundamentally lack the emotional equipment you assume is universal. Research by Dr. Simon Baron-Cohen at Cambridge University on empathy disorders reveals that narcissists and those with antisocial traits don't just choose not to empathize. They lack the neural architecture for the type of empathy empaths experience as automatic. When they mirror your emotions or express vulnerability, they're often engaging in what psychologists call cognitive empathy without affective empathy. They can intellectually understand and mimic emotions. To you, this performance is indistinguishable from genuine feeling, because your brain assumes the internal experience matches the external presentation. Consider the case of David, a human rights lawyer known for his passionate advocacy. He described meeting his ex-partner. "She told me about her troubled childhood with such raw emotion. She cried, describing how no one had ever truly understood her. I felt like I was seeing into her soul. I thought, finally, someone who feels as deeply as I do. It took me 3 years to realize those tears were a performance she'd perfected. She could cry on command, share vulnerable stories, mirror my values perfectly, but none of it was real. It was all a script to hook me. The projection mirror effect is devastating because it turns your greatest strength, your ability to see the good in people, into a weapon against you. You see the person you would be if you behaved as they do. Conflicted, suffering, crying out for help. But you're wrong. They're not a hurting version of you. They're a fundamentally different psychological structure that has learned to imitate the signals that trigger your empathy. Dr. Ramani Durvasula notes, empaths often stay in toxic relationships because they keep seeing potential. They think, if they can express that emotion, that means the capacity is there. But expressing emotion and feeling emotion are different. A skilled actor can make you cry without feeling anything themselves. Narcissists are method actors of emotion. They've studied what gets results and can replicate it without the internal experience. Develop what psychologists call behavioral verification. Judge people by consistent actions over time, not by expressed intentions or emotional displays. Apply the 90-day rule. Regardless of what someone says or how deeply they seem to feel, observe whether their behavior patterns change over 3 months. Genuine growth shows up in behavioral consistency. Performance shows up in cycles. Intensity followed by disappointment, promises followed by repeated failures, emotional displays followed by no actual change. Ask yourself, if I removed all words, only observed actions, what would this person's behavior tell me they value? Actions reveal true priorities. Words reveal what someone has learned to say to get what they want. But even with these insights, empaths face a fourth mechanism that makes leaving toxic relationships extraordinarily difficult. Principle 4, the responsibility illusion. The fourth mechanism that binds empaths to toxic people is what Dr. Ross Rosenberg identifies as pathological responsibility, the belief that you are responsible for others' emotions, behaviors, and ultimately their healing. This isn't just guilt or obligation, it's a fundamental confusion about where you end and others begin. For empaths, this boundary dissolution can feel more natural than separating yourself from another's suffering. Neuroscience reveals why. Empaths demonstrate reduced activity in brain regions responsible for self-other distinction during emotional exchanges. When you feel someone's pain, the neural signature looks remarkably similar to experiencing your own pain. Your brain struggles to maintain clear boundaries between your emotional experience and theirs. Toxic personalities exploit this by deliberately creating crises, emotional emergencies, and situations where you feel that your withdrawal or boundary setting would cause them catastrophic harm. Dr. Carol McBride, specializing in narcissistic family systems, explains, toxic individuals are masters at making their emotional state your emergency. They've learned that empaths will sacrifice their own well-being to prevent others' suffering. So they ensure you always see their suffering as somehow dependent on your presence, your attention, your sacrifice. Consider the case of Rachel, a pediatric oncology nurse whose professional life involved caring for desperately sick children. She described her relationship with her ex-husband. Every time I tried to address his drinking, his unemployment, or his rage episodes, it would turn into a crisis about his childhood trauma, his depression, his suicidal thoughts. I became convinced that if I left, I would be abandoning someone who might not survive without me. The irony is, I worked with genuinely dying children every day, but I could maintain professional boundaries with them. With him, I couldn't separate his well-being from my responsibility. What Rachel discovered through therapy was that her ex-husband had learned to weaponize vulnerability. He wasn't suicidal, he was strategically expressing suicidal ideation to prevent her from leaving. He wasn't unable to work, he was comfortable letting her carry all financial responsibility while maintaining control through emotional crisis. Her empathy had become his insurance policy against accountability. The responsibility illusion operates through a cognitive distortion, confusing compassion with obligation. Compassion says, I care about your suffering. Obligation says, I am responsible for ending your suffering even at the cost of my own well-being. Toxic people deliberately blur this line, making you feel that any boundary you set, any self-protection you attempt, makes you cruel, selfish, or abandoning. Here's the devastating truth empaths struggle to accept. You are not responsible for healing anyone except yourself. Your empathy does not obligate you to sacrifice yourself. Someone else's refusal to take responsibility for their own healing is not your emergency. These statements feel harsh to empaths, almost cruel, but they're the foundation of what researchers call sustainable compassion, caring about others without carrying their responsibilities. Implement the oxygen mask principle from airline safety. You cannot effectively help anyone if you're depleted yourself. When you feel overwhelming responsibility for someone's emotional state, ask, would a healthy person expect me to sacrifice this much? Would I expect someone I loved to sacrifice themselves this way for me? Practice this daily affirmation even though it will feel uncomfortable. I can care about someone's pain without being responsible for fixing it. Their healing is their responsibility. My responsibility is my own well-being and growth. The fifth mechanism reveals how toxic people ensure you stay even when you recognize the relationship is harmful. Principle 5. The Intermittent Reinforcement Hook. The fifth mechanism that makes empaths extraordinarily vulnerable to toxic relationships is psychological rather than emotional. Intermittent reinforcement combined with what researchers call empathic hope addiction. This creates one of the most powerful bonding mechanisms in human psychology, more powerful, studies show, than consistent positive treatment. Dr. Harriet Braker's research on toxic relationships revealed something counterintuitive. Relationships where positive treatment is unpredictable and interspersed with negative treatment create stronger emotional bonds than consistently positive relationships. This is the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. The unpredictability of rewards creates a compulsive drive to keep trying, hoping the next interaction will be the good one you remember. For empaths, this mechanism is supercharged by a specific vulnerability: your ability to see potential and feel glimpses of who someone really is during their good moments. Toxic people typically don't behave badly 100% of the time. Instead, they cycle through what psychologists call idealization, devaluation, and discard phases. Periods of intense affection and attention, followed by criticism, withdrawal, or cruelty, followed by renewed attention when they sense you might leave. Dr. Ramani Durvasula explains, for empaths, those good moments feel like proof. See, this is who they really are, the good person I see underneath. If I just love them enough, support them enough, be patient enough, this version will become permanent. But you're not seeing their real self during good moments and a corrupted self during bad moments. You're seeing the full range of who they are, and the bad moments are just as real as the good ones. Consider the case of Thomas, a high school teacher known for his patience and ability to reach troubled students. He described his relationship. After a week of coldness and criticism, she'd suddenly be the woman I fell in love with. Affectionate, engaged, making plans for our future. Those moments felt like coming home after being lost. I lived for those moments. I would endure anything because I believed that was the real her and the crueler. What Thomas didn't recognize was that this cycle was the relationship. It wasn't a bug, it was the feature. The intermittent positive reinforcement kept him in a state of perpetual hope and effort, always trying to earn or maintain the good version of his partner. His empathy made him interpret her cycles through a healing lens. She's struggling, she's having a hard day, her trauma is activated. But the pattern never changed. The good days never became good weeks. The good weeks never became good months. Research on addiction shows that intermittent reinforcement is more powerful than consistent reinforcement, specifically because it creates uncertainty. Your brain releases dopamine not when you receive a reward, but in anticipation of a potential reward. The uncertainty itself becomes addictive. For empaths, this is compounded by emotional investment. You felt real connection during good moments, which makes you convinced it can be reclaimed if you just find the right approach. Document patterns over time. Memory is unreliable, especially emotional memory. Keep a simple journal tracking good days versus bad days, promises made versus promises kept, how you feel after interactions. After 90 days, review the data. If you're seeing cycles rather than improvement, you're experiencing intermittent reinforcement, not a relationship moving toward health. Ask yourself, am I in a relationship or am I in addiction to potential? If you're constantly hopeful about future change rather than satisfied with present reality, you've identified the answer. The sixth mechanism explains why empaths often can't access anger, the emotion that would protect them. Principle 6. The anger deficit. The sixth mechanism that makes empaths vulnerable to toxic people is what psychologist Dr. Harriet Lerner calls empathic anger suppression. The inability to access or sustain healthy anger because anger feels incompatible with empathy. This creates a critical deficit in your psychological immune system. Anger is the emotion that enforces boundaries, signals violation, and powers the action of leaving harmful situations. Without anger, you're missing your primary defense mechanism. Research by Dr. Kristen Neff on self-compassion reveals that empaths often confuse compassion with the absence of anger. They believe that truly understanding someone's pain should eliminate anger toward them. This creates what therapists call anger phobia, fear that if you feel anger towards someone, it means you lack empathy, patience, or understanding. Toxic people exploit this by ensuring you always understand why they behaved badly, constantly keeping you in a state of compassionate understanding that prevents protective anger. Dr. Judith Orloff notes, empaths often describe feeling sad, disappointed, or hurt in response to treatment that should generate anger. They'll say, "I understand why he did that. His childhood was terrible." But understanding why someone harms you doesn't obligate you to accept continued harm. Anger isn't the opposite of empathy. It's the emotion that says, "This is not acceptable, and I will protect myself." Consider the case of Lisa, a social justice advocate who had dedicated her life to understanding marginalized perspectives. She described her relationship with her narcissistic mother. "I could never stay angry with her. Even when she did something objectively terrible, like showing up drunk to my wedding or telling my children I was a disappointment, I would feel this anger rise, and then immediately I'd think about her difficult childhood, her untreated mental health issues, her own trauma. The anger would dissolve into sad understanding, and she'd continue the same behaviors because there were never consequences." What Lisa learned in therapy was revolutionary for her. Anger and empathy aren't opposites. They can coexist. You can understand why someone behaves harmfully and still refuse to accept that behavior. Empathy explains behavior, it doesn't excuse it. Her inability to sustain anger wasn't a sign of superior empathy. It was a deficit that left her unprotected. Neuroscience reveals why this matters. Anger activates different neural circuits than sadness or hurt. Anger mobilizes energy, narrows focus to threat, and promotes protective action. Sadness and hurt tend to promote withdrawal, rumination, and accommodation. When empaths automatically convert anger to sadness, they're neurologically shifting from a protective response to a vulnerable one. Toxic people often encourage this conversion through strategic displays of their own pain, reminding you of their wounds precisely when your anger begins to rise. Practice anger recognition and validation. When you notice yourself explaining away someone's harmful behavior with understanding of their past trauma or current struggles, pause and ask, "Would I accept this behavior from a stranger who didn't have this history? Am I using empathy to excuse harm?" Try this exercise. Imagine a person you love, a child, a friend, receiving the treatment you're receiving. Would you feel angry on their behalf? If yes, you're capable of appropriate anger. You've just been trained not to feel it for yourself. That anger is information. Listen to it. The final mechanism reveals the ultimate vulnerability that ties all others together. Principle 7. The Identity Fusion Trap. The seventh and perhaps most profound mechanism that makes empaths magnetic to toxic people is what Dr. Ross Rosenberg terms identity fusion, the tendency to construct your sense of self around being needed, helpful, and emotionally indispensable to others. This isn't just about having a generous nature. It's about deriving your fundamental sense of worth from your utility to others, particularly others in pain. This creates a devastating vulnerability. When your identity depends on being needed, you're attracted to people who will always need you but never allow themselves to be helped. Developmental psychology research reveals that many empaths learned early that their value was conditional. They were loved, seen, and validated when they met others' emotional needs, but ignored or criticized when they prioritized their own. This creates what psychologists call conditional self-worth based on caretaking. You literally don't know who you are outside the role of helper, healer, supporter. Dr. Carol McBride's research on narcissistic family systems shows that many empaths grew up in households where they became parentified children, children who took on emotional caretaking responsibilities for adults. They learned to read micro-expressions, anticipate needs, manage others' emotions, and derive satisfaction from successfully meeting those needs. This training created extraordinary emotional intelligence, but also a fundamental confusion, conflating your value with your caretaking. Consider the case of Maria, a hospice chaplain whose professional identity centered on being present for people in their darkest moments. She described her pattern. I realized I didn't know who I was outside of being helpful. When I met someone who needed me, really needed me, I felt alive, purposeful, real. When I was with someone who didn't need my help, I felt almost invisible. My ex-partner was bottomless in his need. He needed someone to manage his emotions, handle his responsibilities, believe in him constantly. It was exhausting, but it also made me feel essential. When I tried to leave, the terror wasn't just about him, it was about losing my sense of purpose. What Maria discovered was that she had unconsciously sought out partners who would confirm her identity as a caretaker. Healthy, self-sufficient partners made her feel unnecessary, which triggered deep anxiety about her value. Toxic partners, with their endless needs and crises, made her feel vital and important. Her empathy wasn't just a trait, it was her entire identity. And toxic people recognized and exploited this, ensuring she always felt needed but never actually helpful, keeping her in perpetual effort without resolution. This is the ultimate trap. When your identity fuses with caretaking, you don't just attract toxic people, you unconsciously need them to maintain your sense of self. Leaving them feels like losing not just a relationship, but your understanding of who you are. This is why empaths often describe feeling addicted to toxic relationships, even when they intellectually recognize the harm. You're not addicted to the person, you're addicted to the version of yourself that exists in relation to their need. Begin the profound work of identity reconstruction. Ask yourself, who am I when no one needs me? What do I value, enjoy, or pursue when I'm not in a caretaking role? What would I do with my life if everyone I loved suddenly became completely self-sufficient? These questions should feel destabilizing if you've built your identity around being needed. That destabilization is the beginning of freedom. Start small. Pursue one activity weekly that has nothing to do with helping, healing, or supporting anyone. Notice the anxiety this creates. That anxiety is the addiction withdrawing. Sit with it. Practice this revolutionary statement. My value exists independent of my utility to others. I am worthwhile simply because I exist, not because of what I provide. Integration, the protected empath system. Understanding these 7 mechanisms is valuable, but transformation requires systematic integration, learning to protect your empathy while maintaining its power. Most advice tells empaths to build boundaries or toughen up, as if empathy itself were the problem. It's not. Empathy is extraordinary, but unprotected empathy is vulnerable empathy. What you need isn't less empathy, it's what Dr. Judith Orloff calls the protected empath system. Empathy with conscious defense mechanisms. The first step is revolutionary. Direct your empathy toward yourself with the same intensity you direct it toward others. When you feel someone's pain, simultaneously notice your own response to that pain. Ask yourself, what is this costing me emotionally? What do I need right now? This dual awareness, holding both the other person's experience and your own, is the foundation of protected empathy. Practice the empathy audit. Each day, track 3 instances where you empathized with someone. For each instance, ask, did I also check in with my own emotional state? Did I notice what I needed in that moment? Most empaths discover they have extraordinary external empathy and almost no internal empathy. This asymmetry creates vulnerability. Implement what psychologists call slow intimacy, deliberately pacing emotional connection regardless of how strong the pull feels. Toxic people rely on rapid intimacy to hook empaths before rational assessment can occur. They create intense connection quickly through strategic vulnerability, deep conversations, and what feels like unprecedented understanding. Counter this with the 90-day rule. Regardless of what someone says or how deeply you feel connected, maintain observational distance for 3 months. Watch for patterns. Do their words match their actions consistently over time? Do they take responsibility for mistakes or always have explanations that make others responsible? Do they show curiosity about your inner world, or do conversations always return to their experiences? Do they respect small boundaries or test and push against them? Do they support your other relationships or gradually isolate you? Healthy people demonstrate consistency across these areas. Toxic people show patterns of inconsistency, responsibility avoidance, self-centeredness, boundary violation, and isolation tactics. Instead of immediately resonating with and absorbing someone's emotional state, practice what therapists call graduated empathetic response, offering empathy in proportion to the relationship's demonstrated trustworthiness. Early in knowing someone, that sounds difficult. After demonstrated reciprocity, I can understand why that would be painful. After proven trustworthiness, full empathic presence. Toxic people become frustrated with graduated response because they're seeking the full empathic experience immediately. Healthy people respect this pacing and reciprocate appropriately. Develop what researchers call empathic firewalls, conscious practices that allow you to care about someone's pain without taking on their pain. When someone shares something emotionally heavy, notice the physical impulse to lean in, reach out, or close distance. Instead, maintain physical space. This sounds cold, but it creates a somatic reminder that you are separate from their experience. After empathetic interactions, especially intense ones, take 10 minutes alone to clear the emotional resonance. Imagine the emotions you absorbed returning to their source. This isn't about not caring, it's about not caring. Practice this mantra: I can witness your pain without owning your healing. Every time you feel the compulsion to fix, save, or rescue, pause and ask, is this person asking for help? Or am I assuming responsibility they haven't requested? Often, empaths provide rescue that wasn't asked for because the act of rescuing relieves their own discomfort with witnessing pain. When you implement protected empathy, toxic people typically respond with escalation. They'll have bigger crises, more intense emotional displays, and more direct accusations that you're being cold, uncaring, or abandoning them. This escalation is diagnostic. Healthy people respect boundaries even when disappointed by them. Toxic people punish boundaries because boundaries disrupt their access to narcissistic supply. If implementing basic emotional protection results in someone calling you selfish, claiming you've changed in negative ways, or threatening crisis, you've just received valuable information. This person was benefiting from your unprotected empathy and is resistant to a healthier dynamic. Finally, combat the isolation that toxic relationships create by maintaining connections with people who see you clearly. Share your experiences with trusted others and explicitly ask, does this sound healthy to you? Am I making excuses? Empaths' greatest vulnerability is their ability to reframe toxicity as understandable struggle. Outside perspective interrupts this reframing. Remember Sarah, the trauma nurse we met at the beginning? Dr. Orloff followed her progress for 7 years after their therapeutic work together. Sarah not only left her toxic relationship pattern, she went on to develop training programs for healthcare workers on protected empathy in high-stress environments. She married a man she described as almost boring at first because there was no crisis, no drama, no one to save, just steady, consistent care. But when Dr. Orloff asked Sarah what had truly changed, her answer was revealing. It wasn't that I became less empathetic. If anything, I feel others' emotions more clearly now. The difference is that I finally developed empathy for myself. I started treating my own emotional well-being with the same fierce protectiveness I'd always given to others. And once I did that, toxic people stopped looking attractive. They started looking exhausting. This is what awaits you on the other side of understanding these mechanisms. Not the loss of your empathic gift, but the addition of conscious protection. Not becoming cold or closed, but becoming wise about where you direct your extraordinary capacity to feel and heal. The 7 mechanisms we've explored – resonance, healing compulsion, projection, responsibility illusion, intermittent reinforcement, anger deficit, and identity fusion – operate like invisible architecture, structuring your vulnerability to exploitation. Most empaths live their entire lives inside these structures, repeatedly attracting toxic people and believing it's either coincidence or personal failure. But you now understand the pattern, and in understanding, you gain the power to disrupt it. Your empathy is not your weakness. Your unprotected empathy is your weakness. Your empathy without boundaries is your weakness. Your empathy directed at others but never at yourself is your weakness. The work begins now. Not tomorrow, not when you finish this current relationship, not after you finally help that toxic person heal. Now. Start with one practice from the protected empath system, just one. Watch what happens when you direct even a fraction of your empathic capacity toward your own well-being. You are not meant to be endlessly giving and never receiving. You are not meant to feel everyone's pain and have no one feel yours. You are not meant to be perpetually needed and never deeply known. Your gift was never meant to be a liability. It's time to protect what makes you extraordinary. The audit begins now. The protection starts today. Your transformation isn't coming, it's already here, waiting for you to recognize that being empathetic and being protected aren't opposites, they're partners.